Hello, friends. It is Wednesday, May 27th, and glad to be back with you after the long holiday weekend. I hope you all had a good holiday weekend. Obviously, a different Memorial weekend than perhaps usual. I think oftentimes Memorial weekend we spend it with family, having barbecues, all those kinds of things, maybe traveling. And this weekend was perhaps very different with this quarantine and pandemic and stay-at-home orders and all those things going on. But even so, even if it was different than the norm, I hope it was a good weekend for you. And again, we want to remember and reflect on the fact that what we remember on and celebrate on Memorial Day are those who paid the ultimate sacrifice for the freedoms we enjoy. The fact that we're able to gather for barbecues and travel freely and worship freely, and all those things are due to the sacrifices of so many who fight to protect our freedoms. So we're grateful for those who pay the ultimate sacrifice. We continue to pray for their families and just to remember them. So we want to do that not only on Memorial Day, but every day. So today, I just wanted to jump on here quickly. I'm actually in kind of grubbier clothes. I'm going to be cleaning some mold out of our pop-up camper today. Aren't you jealous? I'm sure you are. Not the most fun thing, but it needs to be done. So I'm going to be taking half this day off. But I really wanted to jump on here today and just speak to something, kind of a more somber note today. I'm sure many, if not all of you, saw the news over the past couple days of the death of George Floyd, an African-American man in Minneapolis. Just this really tragic situation where he was arrested. If you haven't seen the video, he was arrested for forgery, apparently, and then there were some reports saying he resisted arrest, but regardless, was clearly subdued in cuffs on the ground. But an officer decided to put his knee on his neck and held it there for at least 10 minutes, if not more. Meanwhile, George Floyd was saying he couldn't breathe, was crying out for help. Bystanders were just appealing that the officers would let him up. They wouldn't. He finally went unconscious before the ambulance arrived, and later ended up having died from his injuries with that. So really just this horrible situation. I think the reason that it strikes a chord with me even more, I mean, obviously there are lots of examples of racism and all that we see, unfortunately, regrettably, but having spent a lot of time in the Twin Cities, I went to Luther Seminary, and right kind of between Minneapolis, St. Paul, 2 rounds there, met Marissa back there. Emmaus was born there, so I have a deep love for that area. And I think we think of Minnesota nice, so to see something like this, the complete opposite of nice, really an evil act, it just, I think, is even more jarring for me. But what I wanted to speak to today is this. Again, my goal here is not to kind of draw political sides. I think when things like this happen, so often people are quick to retreat to their respective corners, and that just becomes so divisive. My goal is not to speak against kind of law enforcement, police brutality, any of that. I'm actually a huge advocate for law enforcement. I'm deeply grateful for the work that they do, and I think majority do it really well and faithfully. What I saw in that video, though, was not law enforcement. It was lawlessness. It was not keeping the peace. It was an act of evil and absolute disregard for human life. And that was deeply troubling to me. And so I think that as the church, as a pastor, but also as the church, we are called to speak out against injustice. And I believe racism is one of the greatest injustices that we've ever seen. And Marissa and I were talking last night that it's just kind of mind-boggling that it still exists in such a prevalent way in our country. I think in a lot of ways we kind of naively, for me, probably thought like, oh, it's gone away, or it's really not there as much. Obviously, it's always been there. There's been this undercurrent, but unfortunately, in recent years, it's really stirred back up and kind of come back to the surface and been reignited. And I think that's so regrettable and so tragic. And so the fact that it is just that example yesterday with George Floyd was just, or Monday, but I saw the video yesterday, it was just so hard to watch and so sad. And a pastor friend of mine on Facebook wrote this little blurb, and I think he said it and articulated it really well. He said this: I join with the millions who are heartbroken, sick, angry, lamenting. We have a deeply rooted sin of racism that still runs rampant in our nation. We repent, we lament, we cry out to God, and we take action. This is a gospel issue above all else. And that's true. It is a gospel issue. God cares deeply about injustice. We've talked about that in recent sermon series. God is deeply against injustice, and he wants his people to work for justice. And racism is injustice, absolutely. And it was something that God is against. We see that in Jesus, in the Gospels. We see that the Jewish people, they had deep racism against the Samaritans. What does Jesus do? He breaks down that barrier. He uses a Samaritan as an example of doing the right thing in the account of the parable of the Good Samaritan. He engages with a Samaritan woman at the well, which a Jewish man, and definitely not a rabbi, would never do. Jesus is against racism. We see that. So, as his church, we should be as well. We should be angry about this. Another friend of mine posted this article from the Gospel Coalition. They write a lot of really great articles. And here's a quote from that. It said this: there's another kind of anger, righteous anger against sin and evil, that is rooted in a love for what is good and just. And I worry that sometimes we fail to embrace this Christian virtue because we view all anger as rooted in sin, when it is actually rooted in our image bearing of a righteous God and has only been warped by sin. Again, anger that leads to sin is sin. Okay, it's bad, and we should resist that. But righteous anger rooted in love and seeking justice is a righteous thing, and it's something that at times we need to grab hold of. We see that from Jesus, right? Jesus' clearing of the temple. I've heard that referred to as Jesus' temple tantrum. I love that phrase, his temple tantrum, because it is. He displays righteous anger. He is deeply angry for the injustice and unrighteousness that the people have turned his father's house into. And so he makes that whip and drives them out, turns over the tables. Jesus is angry, but it is a righteous anger. Well, friends, there are times where we too, as the people of God, need to display righteous anger. And this is one of those times when we see racism and we see just such blatant disregard for human life. We are to be people who are for life across the board, not just pick your area or pick your hot button political topic. No, life across the board. And so when we see disregard for human life, we need to speak against that, because every person is created in the image and likeness of God, and they matter deeply to him. Jesus died for every single person. They matter that much to him. So they should matter that much to us. So this is a deep issue, and it's something that as I watched that, I just felt compelled to speak to it. Again, I can't have a huge impact or influence in the world and even in our nation, but as a church, as one of your pastors, I hope I can have some impact and influence here, and to say, as this church, as this body of believers, I hope that we don't see this as okay, and that we feel some righteous anger towards racism and injustice, especially when it's so blatant as that. Here's a verse, 2 verses for you for today. Proverbs 31, verses 8 and 9. Proverbs 31, 8 and 9. Speak up for those who have no voice, for the justice of all who are dispossessed. Speak up, judge righteously, and defend the cause of the oppressed. Unfortunately, there are those in our society, who, especially people of color, who have been silenced, who likely feel like they have no voice, and that is wrong. And as those who perhaps are in this privileged position, we have to stand up for them. We have to speak out. It's not enough to just say, yeah, I'm against it, and then go on with our day. We really need to speak against it. I'm totally blanking on the quote on the fly here, but basically about the greatest evil is for good men to do nothing, for good men or women to do nothing. Again, that we can't just say, well, I didn't participate in it, therefore I'm okay. Well, yeah, but if we didn't do anything, if we didn't speak against it, if we did nothing, we contributed to it. We ultimately do nothing to put an end to it. Racism needs to be put to an end. And as the church, I think we need to take the lead on that. We need to be on the front lines against racism because we believe all people matter to God. They're created in his image and likeness, and Jesus died for them. So that's my word for you today. Just real encouragement to be the church. And to be the church means that we speak on behalf of God, and God is against injustice. God is against racism. So we need to be as well. Because sad reality, racism's everywhere. Racism is definitely here in our community. I see that on a lot of the local community pages. There's a lot of racism, and it's wrong. And so as the church, I just want to encourage us to be against that, to feel some righteous anger. I'm not saying just go spout off because it will just lead to a big divisive thing. But when you see it, especially if you encounter it in person, don't stand idly by. Speak up. Speak for those who have been oppressed. Speak for those who have no voice. And let's reflect God well in this world. So that's my word for today. Again, just something I really felt compelled to speak about. So I hope you have a good day. Hopefully your day is better than mine and you don't find yourself cleaning mold. Doesn't sound very fun. But again, there are people in this world dealing with so many worse things than cleaning mold. So truly, I have nothing to complain about, and really I'm privileged. So, but again, I hope you have a good day. And again, just a reminder to be the church, to reflect God well, to speak against injustice and racism, and just love others, because that's what we're called to do. So God bless you.